Tonight, a string of new provocative comments from President Obama in a 17,000-word profile piece in New Yorker magazine. The president talked about race, marijuana, terror, and more. We begin with the race remarks. The president's poll numbers have been in free fall since his re-election, and especially with white voters. And he's got a theory as to why. He says, quote, "There's no doubt that there's some folks who just really dislike me because they don't like the idea of a black president. Now, the flip side of it is there are some black folks and maybe some white folks who really like me and give me the benefit of the doubt precisely because I'm a black president." We're going to start with those remarks. And, Greg, yesterday when the article came out, the first part of that quote got a lot of attention on Twitter with people getting very frustrated that the president was bringing up race relations again. But I actually, on balance, when I read it, I thought he was probably making a fair point.
I guess so. I think the question is, does this belief that he has translate into action or some kind of punishment targeting specifically a group of people? And I don't think it does, because the great unifying force of President Obama is that his failures know no pigment. He screwed all of us equally.
Well, there is that. Eric, I was going to ask you about the statistics, because the president's approval rating is at 40%, which means that it can't just be white people that are disapproving of the policies or of the president's fifth year as president, right?
Did it take up to 40%, did it?
Yeah,
okay.
It was up 40.
30, I downloaded this piece, 34 pages. I spent an hour and a half reading this thing. Can I just go through a couple of things very quickly?
Sure.
David Remnick, the editor of New Yorker, spends a long time at the very beginning talking about President Obama on Air Force One, the fat lip that he was worried about. He got elbowed playing basketball. Not really relating the fat lip to the Obamacare, the IRS, and all the other scandals that have gone on. Kind of alludes to it a little bit. Then gets into the bombshells, the pot discussion. The reason why his approval rating is because he may or may not be black, and people may or may not be concerned with that. But for me, towards the end, he did something that was really, really kind of weird. He outlines how President Obama spent a lot of time in fundraisers on the West Coast, the celebrity fundraisers, the Magic Johnsons, all the people from DreamWorks, and then goes into this President Obama and income inequality. Now, Remnick, if he had any guts as a journalist, would say, well, why would you be talking about income inequality on the heels of all these celebrity fundraisers? But he never equates the two. He never puts two and two together. And then he ends with this big white, big washy, wet kiss with
the legacy
Obama.
point. The legacy point, right.
The legacy, and then he goes to bear hug him on the way out. It was kind of I wasted an hour and a half.
Well, Bob, one thing that wasn't even asked in the piece, or maybe it was asked but was not included in the final edit, was anything about the long-term unemployed and the job situation in America. And wouldn't that have more to do with the president's approval numbers than racism?
Yeah, it does. But let's a couple of things. Let me just respond to what Eric said. You go where rich people are to raise money, number one. So that's not, I don't equate that with blacks and whites and income inequality. But look at it this way. Obama had almost 40%, 45% of the white vote in the first election against McCain, who got 55%. He then fell back into the upper 30s versus Romney. So I think that the fall off for him had already begun among white voters prior to his reelection. The other thing is that what he did say here was the obvious, that there are some people don't like him because he's black. That's been obvious. But more obvious, I think, to the point was he finally owned up to the fact that people vote for me, some whites, because I'm black. And a lot of blacks vote for me because I am black. Well, that's right. And I'm glad he finally said it.
He seems to be doing a lot of introspection in the second term, and he's probably thinking, he's a young man, so he's going to have a long period after the presidency, and he's going through all of this, Andrew. But it's interesting to me, somehow he manages to insult others even while he's propping himself up, and you're not really sure about it. Let me just read this one part to you on page 3. He says, "I have no desire to be one of those presidents who are just on the list. You see their pictures lined up on the wall. I really want to be a president who makes a difference." I was having a hard time thinking of any president who just wanted to go there and do small things. I mean,
because it's so easy to win the White House, so they're typically underachievers who get elected.
I guess.
That was pretty silly. I was wondering who he was actually referring to.
Buchanan, Polk.
I agree with you. I was surprised to hear him actually admit the second piece of that quote, and I'm glad he did, because I think the second piece is probably more relevant. What I don't understand is every time he's asked about his approval rating, he doesn't own up to maybe the difficulties in Obamacare, or just be honest for once, be intellectually honest. He always goes right to the race piece right out of the gate. And if you look at his poll numbers, they stayed fairly buoyant even after his second election with white voters. And remember, we were trying to figure out how he defies logic by keeping them so high. It wasn't until the IRS scandal, Dana, that those numbers started to tick down. And that I think was the beginning of the end. And now his poll numbers can't get back. It has nothing to do with race. But the fact that he always goes there makes me believe that that's all he really thinks it is, that it couldn't possibly be his own failings.
Dina?
Yes.
Can I add to that? I think that most people who are upset with the president due to his ideology are also upset that his ideology was overshadowed and protected by his race, which is then being construed as racism. But the fact is, being the first black president drowned out being the most left-wing president ever. That is what was, I guess, more disturbing, but is mistaken for an obsession with race when it really isn't. It's more about, look, this guy's progressive. I don't care about his pigment.
I also feel like it shuts down.
What would you say makes him such a leftist? I mean, for those of us on the left, he's not that left.
Taxes,
bailouts, taxes,
well, bailouts. I mean, that was
redistribution.
That was Republicans and Democrats.
His friends palling around with a terrorist. I will never forgive him for that.
Downplaying American exceptionalism.
You didn't build that. We're going to spread the wealth around. We're going to bankrupt the coal industry. Other than that, he's,
pipeline, global warming.
I think that the racism piece actually shuts down discussion. If you're called a racist, that's really hurtful. So if you actually disagree with the nationalization of health care, and you're called a racist, then you tend to maybe just keep your mouth shut.
Yeah. It doesn't help him when he
I agree.
Is that why you're wearing white?
Because I'm a racist?
Yes.
That's why I wear white on Mondays. Thanks for noticing. I want to go to another topic that had a lot of parents thinking through what the president said. This is about marijuana, the legalization of it. Here's a quote from the piece. As has been well documented, I smoked pot as a kid, and I view it as a bad habit and a vice, not very different from the cigarettes that I smoked as a young person up through a big chunk of my adult life. I don't think it is more dangerous than alcohol. Now, he adds in that piece as well that people who think legalizing marijuana is going to solve a lot of problems are probably wrong as well. But the piece that got picked up out of a long article like this is that pot is not as dangerous as alcohol. What do you think as a dad? Does that bother you? Or
I wasn't concerned with that. And in fact, that's probably the most honest part of that section. I found everyone's talking about what President Obama said. Pot is less dangerous because the Remnick also asked him less dangerous. And then he did clarify and said, yes, pot is less dangerous. Fine. Great. That's how you feel. And fantastic. My problem came later. He said regarding Malia and Sasha, he tells them it's a waste of time. Okay. But then he goes in and he plays the race card again. He goes and said, my biggest problem with pot is that minorities are being arrested and incarcerated at a higher rate than whites. And then, for whatever reason, not because minorities tend to be at the lower end of the income area and maybe be using pot and things like that, illegal drugs, on the street versus inside where someone with more money may be doing it, but more almost along the lines of, well, police are targeting blacks, which isn't the case. Well, but
the statistics speak for themselves. As a percentage, more young blacks get arrested for marijuana use than do whites. But when he said, the thing I had a problem with, when he said in that blacks get arrested for marijuana, but middle-class white kids don't. Well, that's wrong. I've had a middle-class white kid who's been arrested for that. So,
I'm sure he appreciates you sharing that with me.
But is he right on that?
It wasn't him, it was me. I was talking.
Is he right on the science of it, Greg, that pot is less dangerous than alcohol?
Look, I don't have the studies in front of me, but the fact remains you cannot ban something simply because it carries a risk. Because then you're going to have to ban snowboarding, you're going to have to ban skydiving, and construction work. There are 27 people who died during the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, 27 more, I bet, during that time that died from pot. So you're more likely to die from tightening a joint than smoking one.
I like that.
Well, it is true, though, that in excess, neither one of them are a good idea. I mean, alcohol, I don't know which one would be considered more dangerous. I consider alcohol extremely dangerous when used in excess.
More people do it.
Yeah,
more people drink.
But the excess use of marijuana, daily use of it, does tend to lead to harder drugs. I believe that.
Do you think, Andrea, that the Democrats might try to run on legalization of marijuana in certain states as part of a 2014 or even a 2016 referendum election strategy?
I think some might. I think some might. Not all. I think it's still a little too risky for someone to make that about the campaign, but I bet the question comes up a lot more than it did before, especially with the president weighing in on it. But I actually agree with him on this quote.
Okay.
I don't.
I wanted to get your take on
so
one
bad
other
about
thing,
it.
and we'll take this. Hopefully, we have 2 minutes left, so we're going to try to get through this topic. And I had one other one. This was on President Obama's discussion about Al Qaeda's resurgence. He says here in the article, the analogy we use around here sometimes is if a JV team puts on Lakers uniforms, that doesn't make them Kobe Bryant. There is a distinction between the capacity and reach of a bin Laden and a network that is actively planning major terrorist plots against the homeland versus jihadists who are engaged in various local power struggles and disputes. And that stood out to me because I wondered, Andrea, about the responsibility he felt on January 20th, 2009, or that he feels now, about the evolution and the changes in al-Qaeda over the past 5 years.
Well, we know in past he said that al-Qaeda has been decimated and that they're on the run. So I don't think he's really grounded in reality when he speaks about the terrorist threat. I thought this quote was probably the most naive of the entire piece. I've compared al-Qaeda with jerseys actually in the past. And yeah, if you put on a jersey, it doesn't make you Kobe Bryant, but it's a lot easier these days to blow people up from your home and get radicalized over a computer than it is to dunk or shoot a three-pointer. And that's what people are doing. They're becoming radicalized. It's not the traditional cells that your former boss had to deal with. It's spreading, and anybody can be radicalized. Just look at the people in Boston. I mean, you actually said this, Dana, before we went live on the show. You said he's basically saying that the terrorists now aren't as good as they were before.
Well,
again, tell that to the people in London or Boston.
Well, that's partly because we're better
that's partly
at tracking them
and also
them.
that they're not as organized. He's right about this. In one hand, that this is not the organized al-Qaeda responsible for 9/11. It's a disparate group of bands who acquire the name of Obama. I mean, of al-Qaeda, slip and tongue. But I'll say this: one thing I disagree with is an AK-47 in the hands of an organized person who's a terrorist, as opposed to an unorganized, still does devastation to people.
So
right, exactly.
And you have actually said what President Obama said in the piece, that you have to distinguish between al-Qaeda and another group that may not be sophisticated. But I say, what's the difference? If he's holding an AK or he's holding a grenade and he's going to lob it over the embassy wall, he's still going to kill people.
But the al-Qaeda that he's talking about that was decimated, the organized al-Qaeda is decimated.
So aren't we playing word games here? Okay, if which I'm not conceding they are, because I don't think they are, but even if there is a certain amount of decimation going on in the al-Qaeda network, what difference does it make at this point if there are other terrorist groups that are trying to be like al-Qaeda and killing Americans? It's the same thing.
I agree with you about that, except they're not as organized nor have the reach that the original al-Qaeda had.
No, they're reaching into different areas.
They're giving me extra time. It's like in soccer, if you get
penalty
penalty time.